Sin is expensive. It's incredibly expensive. But the price is not paid in cash. It's paid in mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual pain. And I'll get to why from personal experience as well. Now, what is sin? Sin is an immoral act considered to be a transgression against divine law, right? So basically, what sin is again an immoral act, which then means that there are morals and ethics that could be laid to ground, that we actually could follow, that we could let ourselves be inspired by and read up on, to cultivate a sense of wisdom, to make certain choices and decisions, and put ourselves on a path that allows us to live in accordance to the divine, that allows us to really truly tap into the potential and the gifts that we inherently have within us. So now, what happens when we live our lives without morals and ethics? What happens when society no longer has a right and a wrong to it? What happens when the advice we're given is to follow our hearts and to do what feels good? Because I've done that. What happens when there's no such thing as right and wrong, but instead just following one's instincts and intuition? Because I have followed my instincts. I followed my intuition. I have lived life without any morals and ethics whatsoever because I was not raised in accordance to anything special to follow or think in accordance to. So I've thought a lot about this from my own experience in my life up until this point. And because I've come up against reality, I've come to realize that I am not as inherently good as I thought initially, or that I was raised to believe in. And that is actually a liberation. It's basically where I could find liberty and responsibility for actions, decisions, and it really can set me on a path that is for the greatest good of all, right? So, God didn't really just, create an arbitrary list of do's and don'ts. I have to, set that straight. And he didn't just do that to see if we could follow them. This life is not some test per se. It's really just an experience to cultivate a sense of character. I believe that God really laid out these sets of essential, basically guidelines for living. Hello. Something that is pretty much non-existent in today's world, right? It is so helpful to have essential guidelines for living. It is so helpful because if we don't have any morals and ethics in our lives, if we don't have anything to live in accordance to, then what happens is that we begin to invent other things to follow. And we're very suggestible to the fallen world and the fallen nature in and around us, right? But if we have these morals and ethics that are grounded in God, it really can help us in navigating this reality and the unknown. See? But it is pretty much non-existent in today's world to follow any kinds of guidelines at all. But again, what I've come to discover is that sin is expensive. It's incredibly expensive, and it is paid in mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual pain if we do not basically check ourselves. Just check ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And I believe that we are here to grow in maturity, to grow in goodness. But if you look at the state of the world, and I have actually escaped that reality. I got to be honest. It was actually one of the sins that came to discover, that I wanted to just escape the reality of the state of the world. You understand that there are no sets of guidelines anymore in this world as to what is good and what is not good, what is right and wrong. And I myself have come to discover I have done things that I'm not proud of. Oh my gosh. And I think that is part of life to some extent, but it shouldn't have to be. That we push ourselves up against these walls where we begin doing things that we inevitably say that we're not proud of anymore. Now, so basically, his anger towards lying, stealing, cheating, coveting, murder, jealousy, and pride is basically some kind of guidelines that he's laid out, because all of these behaviors, what they do is they destroy relationships, they destroy community, they destroy love. And one of the things that I've come to discover is that we've been told, and I've been told growing up, to just do what feels good. Whenever something feels bad, just basically get out of it, right? But I got to share, in some relationships, if something's not gone well, then I felt entitled, I felt prideful, and it's as if I could then do whatever I wanted, right? And so I think when you begin to discover these things about yourself, and you see the consequences of living in ways that you're not proud of necessarily, looking back in hindsight, you realize that there are reasons that we have these guidelines to live in certain ways. Right? And I'm a believer of community, of relationships, of love, of being able to cultivate these things. But if we don't have any guidelines that enable us to grow relationships, to grow community, to grow in love, and if we're just left in this unknown of just, okay, trying to figure it out all on our own, or just looking at Instagram posts all day, trying to figure out what we're going to do, or going to some tarot card reader, or, some kind of psychic or whatever, and just looking outside of us for what to do, then no wonder we're confused. And I've done this myself. And I've had to pay the consequences in so many ways. I've even come to discover how much I, have enjoyed this life, all to the expense of my parents' wallet. And I know that one of the first commandments is really just to really just honor your mother and father. And I've really come to discover that I've not done that to the extent that I can say that I'm proud of that. I remember Jordan Peterson just said that you want to picture yourself at your parents' funeral and ask yourself, what kind of person would you like to be? What kind of things would you like to talk about? What kind of things would you like to share? And not just think about at the end of your life, but at the end of your community's existence, or at the end of your parents' existence. Because if we're not just here to satisfy our own flesh, our own blood, we're here because we're here for each other. And if you look at the state of the world, I'm just mind blown, right? We just don't have any sense of, groundedness in anything. But I think that's the history of this planet, that it's as if, like, if we don't have an anchor in God, then chaos inevitably will occur, because there's no morals and ethics to guide actions to. But then at one point, everything falls over. And what are you left with when you don't have anything? When everyone around you is lost, you will turn to God. And that is exactly, in a way, what happened in my own life with an accident, and it's just put me in place, right? It put me in place to observe the state of my own life, relationships, community. It put me in place, and that is a good thing. And we all will inevitably face ourselves at one point or another. So, in a way, sin is our defined rejection of basically the guidelines that God has for us, right? And it's an effort for us to satisfy our own selfly, egocentric desires. And I remember my mom told me once, she's like, and she's been saying it several times in my life, oh, you're so egocentric, right? And very often up until I realized recently that that actually was the case to some degree. I was just projecting it back. But now I've come to see that what we're here for is to grow in selflessness, to help others, to be a vessel of service to others. And I think that a lot of the time we grow up and we think that the world is centered in and around us. But what if we instead could center ourselves in and around God and ask, okay, God, what would you want me to carry out in this world? What would you allow me to create? Use me as a vessel to serve, to be of service, and to not just serve myself. And it's so much more fulfilling. It's so much more gratifying. Not just gratifying in the short term, but in the long term, when you see the character that you develop as a result of it. So for me, God humbled me, and you will have your own humbling in a way. God humbled me with this accident that really put me in place because think about it. I centered my sense of worth and identity in and around oftentimes my looks. And then suddenly I was there, and like suddenly I can't use my arm that well anymore. Suddenly I have wounds in my right leg, and it just shatters your sense of like self-perception in a way. And it really truly begins anchoring you in truth, which is you're an eternal spiritual being, but you're here in this physical flesh, but you're not defined by your flesh, by your body necessarily. But it also humbled me in the sense of looking at what kinds of things did I do before this? Because this is a self-destructive, occurrence in life. And so it makes you reevaluate. And you might have had your own challenge or challenges or valleys that you've confronted where you're like, well, okay, this happened, but can I begin looking at what kind of part that I played in this? And that is when you can begin to really, truly face yourself and grow and take responsibility and reevaluate and realign. And ultimately, that is what we're here for. So for me, this occurrence made me reevaluate myself and what situations I put myself in. And I put myself in them without having any sense of morals and ethics, right or wrong, good or bad. I wanted to live without any shoulds in my life whatsoever. It was all about me. And so it was a good thing for me to have this, and in this case, happen, unfortunately, to reevaluate and adult up. I had a call with my psychologist the other day, or a therapist, and he was just like, well, what you're growing through right now, you're just adulting up and you're just getting a kind of sense of clarity, about your morals and ethics. And not just your morals and ethics, but following a sense of, laid out guideline. And if you think about it, like I was guided to the word. This is a book. I was guided to it. I did not force myself to, because honestly, the Bible, I had to confront a lot of shame and guilt, even for picking it up and beginning to read it, because it was kind of self-contradictory, because I'd grown up as an atheist. I'd grown up without a God. I'd grown up thinking it's all on me, that I will know what's best for me. And I went on creating my life in accordance to what I thought was best for me. And then it led me down to be drawn to this after having done all of the things that I wanted to do, after having traveled the world, after having moved over here to Mexico, after having gotten involved in all these kinds of modalities. And then it just New Age spirituality modalities, where it's all about find what feels good and, follow your purpose and da 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 da. And then it just, for years, I just kept on hearing Bible, read the Bible, Bible, Bible. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it, honestly, because it was just so radically different to who I was and who I grew up as being. But what I want for you is for you to also maybe have a 180, 360 in your life, where you actually get humbled. You get to meet yourself anew, and you get to meet the self that you basically get to reinvent yourself. And it's not you doing it, it's God doing it. So for me, that was a case where I was an atheist, and I kind of came to Christ through this experience of the accident. And I realized that a lot of the things that led me into this experience, this self-destructive experience, was that there were a lot of morals and ethics that I didn't really kind of follow. And that was sexually, that was relationally, that was with friends and family. That was that I completely ascended my consciousness to the point of dissociating from my body and not really, giving a care in the world for what would happen to me. But think about it, I put myself in that scooter that day, and I said that I was going to go to a birthday. But what I was really getting myself into was just self-destructive relationships, and just destructing my body in a way. And that is really what sin is. You're destructing your sense of self, oftentimes without even knowing it. Like we're blind without even knowing it. So again, it's incredibly expensive to involve ourselves in these things. And yet we inevitably are that. Like we inevitably have this default of defaulting to being self-centered. And that is why I personally have devoted myself now to read the word, to align my sense of behavior, acts, way of being towards that. Because I've come to realize my way did not take me very, very far. It took me here, but I could definitely go further and beyond this and have myself come into greater service for others. And yeah, I just would want the very same for you as well. So that was today's little chat. This is a topic that I am asking God to help me speak on, because it's a sensitive topic, because it involves us facing ourselves. It involves us taking responsibility for our lives and to live more righteously and to grow in maturity and thus grow in God, because that's what God wants for us. So thank you for joining in. And yes, if you'd like to join my community, feel free to do so too, where we grow in this together. You can go to bloombeyond.com/waitlist to join. And then we can talk more about this in there as well, to grow beyond sin and to really align ourselves with the guidelines of God. Thank you. So much love.